A humble young woman went to a job interview, but everything changed the moment she stepped into the mansion. As she looked at a large portrait on the wall, her heart started racing, and then she asked, "Ma'am, why is the father of my daughter in the portrait hanging in your house?" Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. And when it ends, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Julia Fowler stood in front of the gate, her stomach in knots. The Hartford mansion rose before her like a palace out of an old movie. At 26, a single mom to a 4-year-old girl, Julia never thought she'd end up there. But losing her job at the restaurant where she'd worked for 3 years left her no choice. Bills don't wait, and the ad for housemaid for historic estate seemed like her only lifeline. She took a deep breath, straightened her worn blouse, and rang the bell. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with her hair pulled into a perfect bun and the stern look of a school principal about to hand out detention. "You must be the new applicant," the woman said, giving Julia a head-to-toe inspection. "I'm Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper. Come in." Julia stepped inside and immediately felt small. The entrance hall was enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling so high it seemed to disappear. A grand mahogany staircase curved up to the second floor, and the marble floor was polished so well Julia could see her own warped reflection in it. "Wow," she said before she could stop herself. "This place is bigger than the whole grocery store where I shop." Mrs. Thompson gave her a disapproving look, though Julia thought she saw a tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth. Almost a smile. "Almost. Mrs. Hartford will see you in the sitting room. Follow me, and please try to keep your comments to yourself." As they walked through what felt like endless hallways, Julia tried to remember the path, but it was impossible. A right turn, then a left, another hallway, and a staircase that came out of nowhere. It was a maze of luxury, and she was already lost. They arrived at a room with huge windows. In the center, seated in an armchair, was Eleanor Hartford. The family matriarch looked to be around 60, with the upright posture of a ballerina, soft gray hair styled in perfect waves, and a pearl necklace that probably cost more than everything Julia owned. "Mrs. Hartford, this is Julia Fowler," the housekeeper announced. Eleanor looked up from her teacup and studied Julia the way someone might examine a questionable painting. "Sit down, Miss Fowler." Julia obeyed, sitting on the edge of the armchair and trying to look professional. She folded her hands in her lap, sat up straight, and waited. "Do you have experience as a housemaid?" Eleanor's voice was steady and direct. "Not exactly, ma'am," Julia admitted, deciding honesty was her best bet. "But I worked 3 years as a waitress in a busy restaurant. I know how to clean, stay organized, deal with difficult customers. And I have a 4-year-old daughter, so I really understand the idea of cleaning a mess while another one is being made." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that answer. "A daughter?" "Yes, ma'am. Mia. She stays with my best friend during the day. It won't affect my work, I promise." Silence. Eleanor took a slow sip of tea, her eyes never leaving Julia's face. The room grew tense. Julia started to regret bringing up Mia. Then, surprisingly, Eleanor smiled. Just a small smile, but a real one. "I like honesty, Miss Fowler, and I like women who don't bend easily." Eleanor gently set down her teacup. "You're hired. Mrs. Thompson will explain your duties." Julia blinked, stunned. "Really? Just like that?" "I have a good instinct for people," Eleanor said as she stood with grace. "And something tells me you have the kind of strength this house needs. Don't disappoint me." "I won't, ma'am. You can count on me." Julia almost jumped out of the chair, excitement written all over her face. Mrs. Thompson led Julia back through the hallways, explaining schedules, responsibilities, and house rules. Julia tried to focus, but her heart was still pounding from the excitement. Finally, something was going right in her life. They were walking down the main hallway when Julia noticed the walls. Huge, gold-framed portraits covered nearly every inch. Generations of Hartfords stared out solemnly from their frames. Men in suits, women in elegant dresses, children who looked far too serious for their age. And then Julia stopped walking. Her whole body froze. She stared at one large, commanding portrait in the center of the wall. A young man smiled confidently at the camera. Deep brown eyes, a slightly crooked smile, that dimple in his chin, the same dimple Mia had. The air left Julia's lungs. No, it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Miss Fowler? Mrs. Thompson's voice sounded far away, muffled. Are you all right? You look pale. Julia couldn't answer. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. That face. Those eyes. She knew every detail of that face because she saw it every day reflected in her daughter's little face. It was him, Eric. The man who had vanished from her life 5 years ago. Without explanation, without saying goodbye, without a trace. The man she had searched for during months before, finally giving up. The man who never knew she was pregnant, Mia's father. She heard footsteps behind her and slowly turned around. Eleanor Hartford was standing there, watching her with an expression that mixed curiosity with something deeper. Concern, maybe? Or fear? Julia pointed at the portrait with a trembling hand. Her voice came out hoarse but steady. Ma'am, she swallowed hard, forcing the words out. Why is the father of my child in the portrait hanging in your house? The silence that fell over the hallway was heavy and suffocating. Eleanor Hartford visibly turned pale. Her eyes widened, shifting from Julia to the portrait and back again. Mrs. Thompson let out a muffled gasp, bringing her hand to her mouth in shock. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice low and controlled, but filled with urgency. Mrs. Thompson. Each word came like a command. Clear this hallway. Immediately. Everyone out. Now. The housekeeper hesitated only for a second before turning and rushing down the hallway, motioning frantically at the staff who had begun to appear out of curiosity. Doors closed quickly. Fast footsteps echoed. In less than a minute, the hallway was empty. Only Julia and Eleanor remained, the portrait of Eric watching them silently. Eleanor fully turned to Julia, her face filled with a storm of emotions. Shock, confusion, and something Julia couldn't quite name. Fear? Hope? You. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. You're coming to my office now, and you're going to tell me everything. Absolutely everything. Julia nodded, still staring at the portrait, the man who had left her, the man who had vanished. Mia's father was there, smiling from the walls of the Hartford mansion. And Julia was about to find out why. Eleanor Hartford walked ahead with firm steps, but Julia noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. The office was at the end of another long hallway, and with every step, Julia felt her heart tighten even more. When they entered, Eleanor closed the door with excessive care, as if afraid someone might hear. The office was elegant and serious. Bookshelves covered the walls, a mahogany desk stood at the center, and the scent of old leather and polished wood hung in the air. Eleanor pointed to a chair across from the desk. Sit down. Julia obeyed, crossing her arms defensively. Eleanor walked to a sideboard, poured herself a glass of water with still shaking hands, and slowly turned around. That portrait, Eleanor began, her voice calm but tense. That's my son, Jacob Hartford, heir to Hartford Investments. Julia let out a short, humorless laugh. Jacob? That's funny. The man I knew went by Eric. Just Eric. No fancy last name, no mansion, nothing but a backpack and stories about traveling the world. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. Explain, from the beginning. Julia took a deep breath. If she was going to tell it, she would tell it all. No fear, no shame. 5 years ago, I was working at a coffee shop in Charleston. One day, this handsome guy came in, easy smile, laid-back attitude. He said he was traveling around the country, no rush, no specific destination. We started talking. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Julia paused, the memory still vivid. He told me his name was Eric, that he was a backpacker, had no family, lived doing odd jobs here and there. We connected, you know? Eleanor didn't reply, but her face was pale. We spent 3 weeks together. They were the best 3 weeks of my life, Julia continued, her voice now edged with bitterness. He was funny, caring, different from anyone I'd ever met. And then, one morning, he was just gone. No warning, no note, no explanation. He disappeared like he'd never existed. And you got pregnant, Eleanor said softly. Bingo. Julia clapped once, sarcastically. I found out 2 weeks after he vanished. I tried to find him. Spent money I didn't have trying to track him down. But how do you look for someone when you only know their first name? When everything they told you was a lie? Eleanor sank into the chair behind the desk, her composure finally starting to break. Are you absolutely sure it's him? In the portrait? Ma'am, I spent 3 weeks looking at that face. and I've spent 4 years looking at the miniature version of it every time I look at my daughter." Julia leaned forward. "Mia has the same eyes, the same crooked smile, the same little dimple on her chin. So yes, I'm sure." Eleanor covered her face with her hands for a moment. When she lowered them, her eyes were red. "This can't be happening," she murmured. "Well, it is." Julia crossed her arms. "And now you're going to tell me why Eric, or Jacob, or whatever name he goes by these days, was pretending to be some broke backpacker when he's actually heir to a fortune?" Eleanor stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. 5 years ago, my husband passed away. It was sudden, devastating. Jacob? He didn't take it well. He felt lost. He started questioning everything. The business, the responsibilities, the future. One day, he just left, said he needed time, that he needed to figure out who he was without the weight of the Hartford name. Julia listened in silence, trying to take it all in. "We thought he was traveling through Europe or something. He'd call now and then, always vague about where he was. He never mentioned Charleston, never mentioned you." Eleanor turned around, and for the first time, Julia saw real vulnerability in her eyes. "He never mentioned a child, because he didn't know." Julia stood up, frustration rising. "He disappeared before I had the chance to tell him, and when I tried to find him, it was impossible. I didn't even know his real name." The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice softer now. "You said your daughter's name is Mia?" "Yes." "How old is she?" 4. "She'll be 5 in 2 months." Eleanor did the math quickly. The dates lined up perfectly. "Did you have a picture of her?" Julia hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed the home screen photo. Mia, smiling with a crooked plastic tiara on her head, holding a half-melted ice cream cone. Eleanor took the phone with trembling hands and stared at the image. Her eyes filled with tears. "My God," she whispered. "She looks just like him at that age. Same eyes, same smile." Julia felt a lump in her throat watching Eleanor's reaction. "So you believe me now?" Eleanor handed the phone back, discreetly wiping her eyes. "Yes, I believe you." She sat back down, suddenly looking older, more tired. "And now we have a huge problem." "Problem?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "To me, the problem was raising a child alone for 4 years. What's the problem for you exactly?" Eleanor ignored the sarcasm. "Jacob is coming back to Savannah this week." Julia felt the ground shift beneath her. "What?" "He called 2 days ago, said he's ready to return, take on his responsibilities with the company. Duh, he'll be here in a few days." Julia sat back down, her mind spinning. "So, he's going to see me here, working in his house?" "Yes." Eleanor tapped her fingers on the table, thinking fast. "And he's going to find out about Mia." "Well, he should find out," Julia snapped. "He has a daughter. She deserves to know who her father is." "I completely agree." Eleanor raised her hands in a calming gesture. "But we need to do this the right way. For Mia, this is going to be a huge shock for Jacob, and for the child too." Julia hated to admit it, but Eleanor was right. "What do you suggest?" Eleanor thought for a long moment. "First, I need to meet my possible granddaughter. In person." Her voice caught slightly on the word. "I need to be sure, see it for myself. And then we talk to Jacob, together, and deal with whatever comes next." Julia took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to scream, cry, demand immediate answers. But the mother in her, the rational part, knew Eleanor was right. This wasn't about her or about Eric or Jacob or whoever he really was. This was about Mia. "All right," Julia finally agreed. "But there are conditions." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? If you're going to meet my daughter, you're going to treat her with respect. I won't let anyone make her feel less important just because she was born outside of some wealthy family's marriage." "I would never do that," Eleanor said, and there was genuine sincerity in her voice. "And one more thing." Julia pointed a finger. "When Eric, or Jacob, or whatever his name is, comes back, I want to be there when he finds out. He owes me that. He owes me an explanation." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I accept your terms." She stood and extended her hand formally. "Come back tomorrow. Bring Mia. We'll talk, get to know each other properly. And then we wait for Jacob." Julia shook her hand, still trying to process how her whole life had just been turned upside down in less than an hour. As Eleanor walked her to the door, Julia glanced once more at the portrait in the hallway. Eric's smiling face stared back at her, unaware of the chaos his lies had caused. Get ready, Eric, Julia whispered under her breath, because you're about to learn that actions have consequences. And for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, Julia smiled. A small, determined smile. She was going to get her answers. Finally. Julia could barely remember the bus ride back home. Her mind kept spinning, trying to make sense of everything she had learned. Eric was Jacob Hartford. The aimless backpacker was actually a millionaire heir. The man who had vanished from her life was the son of one of the wealthiest families in Savannah. When she finally walked into the small apartment she shared with Kayla, her best friend was in the kitchen making sandwiches for Mia. Well? Kayla turned around, excited. How did it go? Did you get the job? Is the mansion as amazing as they say? Julia let her bag fall to the floor and dropped onto the worn-out couch. Kayla, you're not going to believe what happened. Kayla picked up on the tone right away and quickly took Mia to the bedroom to watch a cartoon. She came back and sat beside Julia. What is it? Were they rude to you? Did they treat you badly? Worse. Julia covered her face with her hands. I found Mia's father. Kayla blinked, confused. What do you mean you found him? He was at the mansion? Not exactly. He was in the portrait at the mansion. Julia, you're speaking in code. Just tell me what happened. Julia told her everything. Every detail. The portrait, the real name, the fortune, Eleanor, the deal. Kayla listened wide-eyed, her mouth slowly falling open in shock. Wait. Kayla raised her hands. You're telling me the same Eric who ditched you while you were pregnant is actually Jacob Hartford, heir to $1 billion fortune? Million, but yes. And he pretended to be a broke backpacker? Apparently. And now his mom wants to meet Mia? Exactly. Kayla sat in silence for a moment, trying to process. Then she burst out laughing, loud and amazed. Girl, your life turned into a telenovela. This is not funny, Kayla. Julia jumped up and started pacing. How am I supposed to explain this to Mia? She keeps asking about her dad every week. And now what am I going to say? That her dad is rich, lied about everything, and is just going to show up in her life out of nowhere. Kayla stood and gently held Julia's shoulders. Breathe. You're going to handle this the way you handle everything, one step at a time. She gave her an encouraging smile. And hey, at least now you have answers, and maybe even child support? Julia let out a short laugh, in spite of everything. You're terrible. I'm realistic. Kayla gave her shoulder a pat. Now come eat something. Tomorrow you go face the rich lady and show her that Julia Fowler doesn't back down from anyone. That night, Julia could barely sleep. She stared at the ceiling, imagining what the next day's meeting would be like. The next morning, Julia gently woke Mia. Good morning, sweetheart. Today, Mommy needs to take you somewhere special. Mia rubbed her sleepy eyes. Where, Mommy? To the house where Mommy is going to work. There's a nice lady who wants to meet you. Why? Julia smiled as she brushed her daughter's curls. Because you're too special not to be known. Mia accepted the answer with a child's simplicity and was soon dressed in her best little floral dress, holding Julia's hand as they waited for the bus. When they arrived at the Hartford mansion, Julia's stomach flipped again. But this time, she had Mia by her side, and that gave her extra courage. Eleanor greeted them at the door herself, and Julia noticed she was clearly nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt down to Mia's level. Hello, sweetheart. You must be Mia. Mia hid behind Julia's leg, shy. Say hi, Mia, Julia encouraged softly. Hi, Mia whispered. Eleanor smiled, and Julia saw tears welling in the older woman's eyes. You're beautiful. Want to see the gardens? We have a really nice swing out there. Mia's eyes lit up. Can I, Mommy? Of course you can. They walked out to the gardens, and Julia watched as Eleanor patiently and kindly showed everything to Mia. The little girl quickly shed her shyness, running through the perfect lawn and laughing when Eleanor pushed the swing. Julia felt a tightness in her chest. It was strange, watching her daughter connect with the grandmother she never knew she had. After a while Mia explored the flower beds with childlike curiosity, Eleanor sat beside Julia on a stone bench. She's perfect, Eleanor said quietly, discreetly wiping her eyes. Thank you. And you've done a wonderful job raising her on your own. That's clear. Julia looked at her, surprised by the sincerity. I just did what any mother would do. Eleanor stayed quiet for a moment before watching Mia. Jacob wasn't always like this, she began softly. Before he lost his father, he was responsible, focused, committed. But when my husband died, something broke in him. He couldn't handle the pressure, the expectations. I think running away was the only way he found to breathe. That still doesn't excuse lying to me, Julia said firmly. No, it doesn't, Eleanor agreed. But maybe it explains it. He was trying to be someone else, someone who didn't have to carry the Hartford name. And in the process, he created an even bigger weight, a daughter he doesn't even know exists. Eleanor nodded sadly. He needs to know. He needs to take responsibility. I couldn't agree more. They sat in silence, watching Mia chase a butterfly through the garden, her laughter filling the air. Then they heard hurried footsteps. Mrs. Thompson appeared on the porch, clearly flustered. Mrs. Hartford, she called, trying not to shout. The driver just called. Mr. Jacob's plane landed early. He's on his way. He'll be here in less than 15 minutes. Julia felt her blood run cold. Eleanor turned pale. Already? Eleanor stood up quickly. He wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. There was a change of plans, ma'am. He's coming straight from the airstrip. Julia stood too, her heart racing. 15 minutes. In 15 minutes she would be face to face with Eric for the first time in 5 years. Mia, come here, sweetie, Julia called, trying to keep her voice steady. Mia ran to her, holding a flower she had picked. Look, Mommy. Isn't it pretty? Very pretty, honey. Julia lifted her into her arms, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Eleanor could hear it. Eleanor touched her arm. Do you want to leave? We can do this another time. Julia thought for a moment. She could run, avoid the confrontation, delay the inevitable. But then she looked at Mia, who stared at her with those brown eyes so much like Eric's. No. Her voice came out steady. I've waited 5 years for answers. I'm not running now. Eleanor nodded, respecting her decision. Then let's wait inside. Mrs. Thompson, please bring tea to the sitting room. They went in, and Julia sat down with Mia on her lap, the little girl playing with the flower, unaware of the tension in the air. Eleanor sat stiffly in her armchair, her hands tightly clasped together. Time seemed to stop. Every second dragged on forever. Julia counted in her head. 10 minutes. 8. 5. Then they heard it. The unmistakable sound of a car pulling up on the gravel outside. Doors opening, footsteps on the porch, a man's deep voice thanking the driver. Julia held her breath. The front door opened. Firm footsteps echoed across the marble hallway, getting closer to the sitting room. Eleanor stood, tense. Julia held Mia closer, and then he appeared at the entrance to the room, Jacob Hartford. Older, more refined, dressed in a flawless suit that probably cost more than Julia paid in rent for an entire year. He looked at his mother first and started to smile. Mom, Then his eyes landed on Julia, and the world stopped. The smile froze on his face. The color drained from his cheeks. He dropped his suitcase with a dull thud. Julia? His voice was hoarse, stunned, shocked. Julia stood up slowly, placing Mia behind her. Hi, Eric. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Or should I say Jacob? He stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes bouncing from Julia to Eleanor and back to Julia. What are you doing here? Julia crossed her arms, every muscle tight. Surprised? Jacob stood frozen at the entrance, completely stunned. His eyes scanned Julia's face like he was trying to make sure she was real and not just a dream. Julia, he repeated, his voice unsteady. What are you doing here? How did you find me? Julia let out a dry, humorless laugh. Find you? I didn't even know you existed, sweetheart. I came here looking for a housekeeping job. Imagine my surprise when I saw your lying little face hanging on the hallway wall. Housekeeping? Jacob blinked, confused. You don't understand. I understand just fine. Julia stepped forward, sarcasm sharp in every word. Let me guess. Eric the backpacker doesn't exist. He was just a fantasy, a made-up character so you could play with regular people while running away from your rich boy life? Jacob opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Eleanor stood up, her sharp voice cutting through the tense silence. Jacob Hartford, you are going to sit down and explain everything. Right now. Jacob looked at his mother, then at Julia, completely lost. Mom, I don't know what's going on. Sit down. Eleanor pointed to the armchair with an authority that didn't leave room for argument. Jacob sat down mechanically, sinking into the armchair like a student called to the principal's office. Julia stayed standing, arms crossed, looking at him with a mix of anger and long-held pain. Explain, Eleanor ordered. Now. Jacob ran his hands through his hair, clearly desperate. 5 years ago, after Dad passed away, I was a mess. I couldn't breathe in this house, in this city, in this life. All the expectations, the pressure, the company, it was too much. So you ran away like a coward, Julia added, her voice sharp. I needed to disappear. Jacob stood up, agitated. To be someone else, someone without the weight of the Hartford name. So I traveled, used another name, pretended to be someone different. And you lied to a woman who trusted you, Julia shot back. Told me sweet stories about living free and without commitments, when in truth you had a fortune waiting for you. I wasn't lying about my feelings. Jacob took a step toward her. Those 3 weeks were the most real of my life. I was myself with you, not the Hartford air, just me. How convenient, Julia said bitterly. You were yourself, using a fake name, hiding your whole life. There's another word for that, Jacob. It's called manipulation. That's not what it was, he protested. When I left Charleston, I was planning to come back. I was going to tell you everything. But you didn't, did you? Julia felt the tears burning but refused to let them fall. You vanished like smoke. No note, no explanation, nothing. Do you have any idea what it was like trying to find you? Spending money I didn't have to track someone who didn't even exist? Jacob turned pale. You tried to find me? Of course I did. I thought something terrible had happened to you. But no, you were perfectly fine, probably back in your mansion and your luxurious life. Eleanor stepped in, her voice cold. Jacob, is this true? You got involved with this young woman while using a false identity? Jacob sank back into the armchair, face in his hands. Yes, I was an idiot. I know that now. Idiot doesn't even begin to cover it, Julia muttered. He looked up, eyes red. Julia, I'm so sorry. Truly, I was confused, lost, running from myself. But those moments with you were real. I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. Julia cut him off. You don't deserve my forgiveness. Eleanor stepped forward, her posture firm. Jacob, there's something else you need to know. He looked at his mother, confused. Eleanor took a deep breath, and Julia saw her gathering her courage. You have a daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. Jacob went completely still, like he'd turned to stone. His eyes widened, locked on Eleanor. What? The word came out like a strangled whisper. You heard me. Eleanor's tone didn't waver. You have a 4-year-old daughter. Jacob slowly turned to Julia, the color draining from his face. You were pregnant? Congratulations, Einstein. You figured it out. Julia pulled out her phone, tapped quickly, and held it up to him. Here, meet Mia, your daughter. Jacob took the phone with trembling hands. In the photo, Mia was smiling brightly, her brown eyes shining, the dimple in her chin identical to his. Oh my God, he whispered, the tears finally falling. She's just like you? Julia finished. Yes, everyone sees it, everyone but you, of course, because you weren't there. Jacob couldn't take his eyes off the photo. His hands were shaking so badly, Julia thought he might drop the phone. I have a daughter, he repeated, like he was trying to make the words make sense. A daughter. You've had one for 4 years, Julia said, taking the phone back. And she's doing just fine without you. I raised her alone, working double shifts, fighting to put food on the table. But I did it. She's healthy, happy, smart, and beautiful. Jacob covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. Eleanor stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. Why didn't you tell me? Jacob looked at Julia through the tears. Why didn't you try to find me? Julia laughed, stunned. Find you? How? With what information? Hi, I'm looking for a guy named Eric with no last name who disappeared. You erased every trace of your existence. I didn't know, if I had known. But you didn't, and that's the point. Julia felt the anger rise again. You disappeared, you walked away, and now you want me to feel sorry for you because you're finally facing the consequences? Jacob stood up suddenly. I need to see her. I need to see my daughter. She's not yours, Julia said flatly. You may be her biological father, but you're not her dad. You weren't there when she was born, when she had a fever, when she took her first steps, when she said her first word. You're a stranger. Julia, please. Jacob took a step toward her, hands out in a pleading gesture. I know I ruined everything. I know I don't deserve anything. But let me meet her. Let me try to make this right. Julia was about to respond when they heard soft footsteps running down the marble hallway. Mommy, Mia's high-pitched voice echoed. Mommy, where are you? Julia turned quickly. Mia appeared at the doorway, running with her pink backpack bouncing behind her. She had gone to the bathroom with Mrs. Thompson, but now she was back. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Julia opened her arms, and Mia ran straight into them. And then it happened. Jacob saw the little girl in person for the first time. Not a photo, but the real child, flesh and blood. The same brown eyes, the same wavy hair, the same dimple when she smiled at her mother. He staggered backward, grabbing the armchair to keep himself from falling. Mia noticed the strange man and shyly hid behind Julia's legs, peeking out with curiosity. "Who's he, Mommy?" Julia looked at Jacob, who stood completely frozen, tears running freely down his face. Then she looked at Eleanor, who was watching the scene with tears in her own eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the moment was too much for words. Finally, Julia took a deep breath and stroked Mia's hair. "This is a friend of Grandma Eleanor, sweetheart." Jacob let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a sob and a disbelieving laugh. He wanted to speak, wanted to move closer, but his feet felt stuck to the floor. Mia gave him a small wave. "Hi." Jacob tried to respond but could only manage to wave back, completely unable to form words. Eleanor gently stepped toward Mia, kneeling down to her level. "Mia, sweetheart, how about you go with Mrs. Thompson and get some cookies from the kitchen? The special ones you liked earlier." Mia's eyes lit up. "Can I, Mommy?" Julia nodded, still watching Jacob carefully. "Yes, you can. But don't take too long, all right?" "Okay." Mia ran off, her childlike energy briefly lifting the heavy atmosphere in the room. As soon as she was gone, Jacob collapsed into the armchair again, his whole body shaking. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Julia didn't respond. She just watched the man who had broken her heart fall apart in front of a reality he never imagined facing. Eleanor broke the heavy silence that had filled the room. "Jacob, go pull yourself together. Wash your face. You look like you were hit by a truck." Jacob nodded mechanically, stood up on shaky legs, and left the room. Julia heard his quick footsteps going upstairs. "He's in shock," Eleanor said, sitting down with a tired sigh. "Welcome to the club." Julia answered flatly. "I had 4 years to process. He's had 5 minutes." Eleanor looked at her with something close to admiration. "You're very strong, Julia." "I didn't have a choice." Minutes later, Mia came bouncing back in, holding a chocolate cookie in each hand, her mouth already covered in crumbs. "Mommy, look, the nice lady let me take 2. Julia smiled and wiped her daughter's face with her thumb. "You little cookie monster, want to go outside and run a bit before we head home?" "Yes." Mia ran toward the garden. Julia followed, with Eleanor at her side. When they stepped onto the perfect lawn, Mia was already exploring everything with the endless curiosity only children have. She ran to the swing, then to the flower beds, then to a small, decorative fountain. Jacob appeared on the back porch. He had washed his face and combed his hair, but his eyes were still red. He stood there quietly, just watching Mia play. "She has so much energy," Eleanor said with a small smile. "She always has," Julia replied, never taking her eyes off her daughter. "Since the day she was born, she doesn't stop for a minute." Jacob slowly walked down the porch steps as if afraid any sudden move might break the moment. He stopped at a safe distance, just watching. Mia noticed the strange man again and stopped running, looking at him curiously. Jacob took a hesitant step toward her. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse. Do you like swings?" Mia nodded shyly. "Want me to push you?" Mia looked at Julia, silently asking for permission. Julia hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Mia ran to the swing and Jacob followed. He helped her up with extra care, as if she were made of glass. Then he started pushing her gently. "Higher?" Mia asked, laughing. Jacob pushed a little harder and Mia burst out laughing, the sound filling the garden. Julia stood back with her arms crossed, her emotions a tangled mess. Seeing Jacob with Mia was surreal, painful. But also, something else she didn't want to name. Jacob was so focused on Mia that he didn't notice a large garden decoration in his path, a ridiculously oversized stone gnome. As he stepped back to get a better angle to push the swing, his foot hit the gnome. He stumbled, arms flailing to keep his balance, and landed hard on the grass with a loud thud. Julia couldn't help herself. She burst out laughing, loud and genuine. "Graceful as ever, Eric," she teased. Jacob looked up at her from the ground, his expression a mix of embarrassment and relief at seeing Julia laugh. Even Mia was laughing, pointing at him. The man fell. Jacob smiled as he stood up, brushing grass off his expensive suit. That gnome was giving me a weird look. I had to teach him a lesson. Mia laughed even harder, and Julia felt something inside her soften, just a little. Eleanor stepped closer, watching the scene with eyes shining from held-back tears. She has his laugh, she murmured to Julia. When Jacob was little, he laughed just like that. Julia didn't reply, but she couldn't deny it. The resemblance was striking. After a few more minutes in the garden, Julia decided it was time to go. Mia, come on, sweetheart. We have to catch the bus. Already? Mia pouted. But I wanted to play more. We'll come back another day, Eleanor quickly said, looking to Julia for confirmation. Julia nodded, though a bit reluctantly. Another day? Yes. As Julia grabbed Mia's backpack, Jacob walked over, hesitating. Julia, can we talk? Alone? Just 5 minutes? Julia looked at Eleanor. Could you take Mia to get some more cookies while we talk? Eleanor smiled and held out her hand to Mia. Come, sweetheart. Let's see if we can find strawberry cookies this time. Mia eagerly took her hand, and the two of them went back into the house. Jacob and Julia were left alone in the garden. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. I don't even know where to start, Jacob finally said. How about starting with why it took you 5 years to grow up and take responsibility? Julia suggested sharply. Jacob sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I know I messed everything up. I don't have an excuse. But Julia, those 3 weeks with you were real. My feelings were real. And you still left. I was a coward. I was running away from everything and everyone, including myself. He looked her in the eye. But I never stopped thinking about you. How convenient to remember now, Julia replied. Jacob took a step closer. Let me meet my daughter. Let me be a part of her life. Let me try to fix this. Julia studied his face, looking for any sign of dishonesty. But all she saw was genuine desperation. It's going to take time, she said finally, and you'll follow my rules. No showing up out of nowhere, no confusing her. Everything gradual. On my timeline. Anything, Jacob agreed at once. Whatever you want. Julia was about to respond when Mrs. Thompson appeared on the porch holding a phone. Mr. Jacob, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's urgent. Miss Vanessa is on the line. She's quite upset. Jacob visibly went pale. Vanessa? Julia repeated, raising an eyebrow. Who's Vanessa? Jacob looked like a cornered animal. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it, Julia said, crossing her arms. Mrs. Thompson, always up to date on Mansion gossip, couldn't resist. Vanessa Reed, his fiancée. The world stopped. Julia stared at Jacob, who looked like he wished the ground would open up and swallow him. Fiancé? Her voice was dangerously quiet. You're engaged? I was, Jacob rushed to clarify. I mean, technically I still am, but technically. Julia took a step toward him, eyes flashing. You're engaged and didn't think that was important to mention? While talking about being part of your daughter's life? It's not what you think. And what exactly should I be thinking, Jacob? Julia was shaking with anger. That you're a man with a fiancé who just found out he has a secret daughter? How do you think your bride-to-be is going to feel about that? I'm going to break it off, Jacob said desperately. I was planning to do it even before I knew about Mia. Sure you were, Julia replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Mrs. Thompson, still on the porch, added at the worst possible moment. Miss Vanessa said she's arriving tomorrow morning, Mr. Jacob. She wants to discuss the wedding plans. Julia looked at Jacob with an expression that could freeze fire. Wedding plans? Wonderful. Julia, wait. No, Julia raised a hand. I don't want to hear it. You're the same coward from 5 years ago. The only difference is you wear an expensive suit now. She turned toward the house and called out firmly. Mia, we're leaving. Mia came running, a cookie in each hand again. Already, Mommy? Yes, Eleanor appeared behind Mia, sensing the tension. Julia? Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Hartford, Julia said formally. But I think it's best if we don't come back anytime soon. Julia, please, Jacob begged, following her. Let me explain. Julia turned to him at the mansion's entrance, Mia holding her hand. You know what the difference is between you and a real man, Jacob? She didn't wait for an answer. A real man doesn't run away, doesn't lie, and definitely doesn't get engaged while hiding a secret daughter. I didn't know about Mia. But you knew you'd left me with no explanation. You knew you were a coward. And still, you kept being one. She picked Mia up and walked out the front door without looking back. Jacob stood in the hall, Eleanor beside him, the sound of the door closing echoing like a gunshot. "You're engaged?" Eleanor asked, her voice cold. Jacob covered his face with his hands. "Mom, I can explain." "Then explain." "Quickly. Because Vanessa Reed is arriving tomorrow morning." The next morning the Hartford mansion was in chaos. Mrs. Thompson rushed back and forth, organizing everything for Vanessa Reed's arrival, while whispering frantically with the other staff about what had happened the day before. "I heard he has a secret daughter," one of the maids murmured. "And the mother is the new employee, that Julia woman," another added. "Imagine when Miss Vanessa finds out." Eleanor appeared in the hallway, and everyone fell silent instantly, hurrying back to their work. But the tension in the air was thick. Jacob was in the office, phone in hand, trying to gather the courage to call Vanessa and cancel her visit. But before he could dial, the sound of tires on the gravel driveway echoed outside. She had arrived. Vanessa Reed stepped out of a bright red convertible, her high heels clicking sharply on the ground. She was tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than 6 months of Julia's rent. Huge sunglasses covered half her face. "Jacob, darling." She entered the mansion as if she owned it, dramatically removing her sunglasses. "I've missed you so much. We have so many wedding details to sort out." Jacob came down the stairs, his face pale. "Vanessa, we need to talk." "Of course, darling, but first." She noticed Eleanor. "Eleanor, how are you? The mansion looks divine, as always." "Vanessa," Eleanor replied politely but with a chill. That's when Mrs. Thompson appeared, and behind her, to Jacob's horror, was Julia. She had come back that morning, convinced by Eleanor over the phone to give the situation one more chance, especially for Mia's sake. Julia stopped in the hallway, facing Vanessa. The two women sized each other up instantly. "Oh." Vanessa looked Julia up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "You must be the new maid?" Julia smiled with false sweetness. "That's right, and you must be the surprise fiancé. Pleasure to meet you." The tone in Julia's voice made it clear it was no pleasure at all. Vanessa frowned, sensing something strange in the air. "Jacob, darling, who exactly is this woman?" Jacob opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked helplessly from Julia to his mother. "It's a long story," Eleanor stepped in diplomatically. "I've got time," Vanessa replied, crossing her arms. Julia decided she wasn't going to sit through all the drama. "You know what? I don't need this in my life." She turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Hartford, thank you for the opportunity, but I'm quitting." "No," Eleanor and Jacob said at the same time. Vanessa looked at everyone, more confused and annoyed by the second. "Can someone please tell me what is going on here?" "Vanessa," Jacob began, his voice steady. "We need to talk. Privately." "You can say it in front of everyone," Vanessa replied coldly. "After all, we're practically family." Jacob took a deep breath. "I can't marry you." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa blinked several times, as if unsure she'd heard him right. "What? I can't marry you," Jacob repeated. "I'm sorry." Vanessa let out a loud, humorless laugh. "You're joking, right? This is some kind of test?" "It's not a test. I'm serious." Vanessa's face turned red. "You can't be serious. The wedding is in 3 months. The invitations are already ordered. My whole family is expecting this." "I know, and I'm really sorry, but it's because of her?" Vanessa pointed at Julia accusingly. "That maid? You're dumping me for a maid?" Julia stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "First of all, I'm not just a maid. Second, no one is dumping you, because to be dumped, you'd have to be worth something to begin with, which clearly isn't the case." "How dare you?" Vanessa hissed. "Easily," Julia replied with a sweet smile. Eleanor let out a laugh disguised as a cough. Vanessa turned to Jacob, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "If you break up with me in public, Jacob Hartford, I promise you'll regret it. My father has connections. I can ruin Hartford Investments' net reputation in a week. I can stir up scandals that'll stain your family name for generations." Jacob turned pale but stood his ground. "Then go ahead, but I'm not marrying you." "Jacob," Eleanor began, concerned. Vanessa gave a wicked smile. "Fine, then get ready to watch your precious family empire fall apart." She grabbed her sunglasses and purse. "And you," she added, looking at Julia, "whoever you are, enjoy it while it lasts. Men like Jacob always come back to women like me." Julia laughed. "Relax, sweetheart. I'm not interested in your leftovers." Vanessa stormed off, her car speeding away and kicking up gravel. The silence that followed was heavy. Jacob dropped into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "She's going to go through with her threats," he muttered. "Let her try," Eleanor said firmly. "Hartford Investments has survived worse." Julia watched it all, torn between the satisfaction of seeing Vanessa put in her place and genuine concern about what this could mean. "Jacob," she said finally, "you didn't have to do that." He looked up, his eyes red. "Yes, I did. I can't build a life on lies. I already did that once, and I lost everything." Julia didn't know what to say. Before she could speak, her phone rang. It was Kayla, and her voice was tense. "Julia, you need to come back now. It's Mia. She has a really high fever and keeps throwing up. I'm scared." Julia's heart stopped. "I'm coming. I'm on my way right now." She hung up, panic taking over. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, seeing the fear on Julia's face. "It's Mia. She's sick. I have to go right now." "My driver will take you," Eleanor offered at once. "I'm going with you," Jacob said, already on his feet. "You don't have to." "She's my daughter, Julia." His voice was steady. "I'm going with you." Julia wanted to argue, but there was no time. She nodded and the two of them rushed to the car. The ride was tense. Julia called Kayla several times, and each time Kayla said the fever was getting worse. When they finally reached the apartment, Julia ran up the stairs. Mia was on the couch, pale, sweaty, shivering under the blankets. Her eyes were glassy, and she was softly whimpering. "Oh my God!" Julia dropped to her knees beside her. "Mia, honey, Mommy's here." Mia barely responded, just let out another weak sound. "How long has she been like this?" Jacob asked, kneeling on the other side. "It started about an hour ago," Kayla replied, visibly shaken. "The fever won't go down." Julia touched Mia's forehead and felt the burning heat. "We need to get her to the hospital, now." Jacob didn't hesitate. He gently lifted Mia in his arms, and the little girl instinctively curled up against him, even in her feverish state. "My car's outside. Let's go." They rushed down the stairs. Julia got in the back seat. Jacob carefully placed Mia in her arms and sat beside them as the driver sped off toward the nearest hospital. During the ride, Jacob held Mia's tiny, burning hand, his face filled with fear and determination. "She's going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Julia. "She has to be okay." Julia looked at him and saw the real fear in his eyes. For the first time since she saw him again, she didn't see the man who had left her. She saw a desperate father. When they arrived at the hospital, Jacob carried Mia across the parking lot with Julia beside him. They entered the emergency room, and nurses quickly took Mia into a treatment room. Jacob tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him. "Sir, you need to wait here. Only the mother can go in." "But she's my daughter." Jacob's voice cracked with desperation. The nurse hesitated, looking at Julia, who nodded. "Let him in. He's her father." They entered the emergency room together, where doctors were already examining Mia. While they waited, holding on to each other without realizing it, Jacob whispered, "I'm sorry for everything, Julia. Please let me make this right. Let me be the father she deserves." The doctor, Dr. Patterson, a woman in her 50s with a kind but professional expression, examined Mia carefully while Julia held her daughter's little hand. Jacob stood on the other side of the bed, tense and quiet. "It's a strong viral infection," the doctor explained after a few minutes. "Nothing serious, but she needs IV fluids and monitoring. We'll keep her here for a few hours to lower the fever and make sure she stays stable." Julia's knees nearly gave out with relief. "She's going to be okay? She'll be just fine," Dr. Patterson said with a reassuring smile. "Kids this age bounce back quickly. We just need to make sure she stays hydrated." They moved Mia to a private room, and a nurse set up an IV. Mia whimpered as the needle went in, and Jacob instinctively took her other hand. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "You know what this is? It's a magic potion, like the ones the princesses drink in the cartoons." Mia looked up at him with red, teary eyes. "Magic potion?" "That's right. It's going to make you strong again, even stronger than a superhero." Mia gave a faint little smile, and Julia felt something tighten in her chest. For the next few hours, Jacob didn't leave Mia's side. He told silly stories, made funny animal voices, and even attempted a disastrous duck impression that made Mia laugh, really laugh, for the first time since she got sick. "That duck is broken," Mia said, her voice still weak but amused. "Broken? I'm the best duck in all of Savannah." Jacob replied, making even more ridiculous noises. Julia watched from her chair in the corner, her emotions swirling inside her. Seeing Jacob with Mia like this, patient, funny, truly caring, was breaking down the walls she had built around her heart. "You're good with her," Julia admitted quietly, once Mia finally fell asleep, her fever starting to fade. Jacob looked at the sleeping girl, his eyes shining. "She's amazing. You've done an amazing job raising her." "I didn't have a choice." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved closer to Julia. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, their voices low so they wouldn't wake Mia. "Julia," he began, his voice full of emotion, "I need to tell you the truth. All of it." Julia crossed her arms defensively, but she didn't stop him. "When I met you in Charleston, I was running away from everything. The company, the responsibilities, the expectations. My father had just died, and I was falling apart. I couldn't be Jacob Hartford. That name, that last name, it was just too heavy." He ran a hand through his hair, the emotion clear on his face. "So I became Eric, just a regular guy. No complicated past, no planned future, just someone living in the moment." He looked straight at her. "And then I met you." Julia felt tears start to burn, but she held them back. "Those 3 weeks were the most real thing I've had in years," Jacob continued, his voice cracking. "For the first time in a long time, I laughed like I meant it. I smiled, I felt, and I fell in love." Julia let out a bitter laugh. "What a romantic way to describe a lie." "It wasn't a lie," Jacob said. "My feelings were real. You were real. What we had was real." "But you weren't," Julia shot back, the tears finally falling. "You were a fantasy, an illusion." "I was me," Jacob insisted. "I just had the wrong name. But the man who fell for you, who stayed up talking for hours, who laughed at your terrible jokes in the cafe, that was me. The real me." Julia wiped her tears, angry now. "Then why did you leave? If it was all so real, so true, why did you just disappear?" Jacob closed his eyes, the pain written all over him. "Because I was scared. Scared that if you found out who I really was, you'd hate me. Scared to bring you into this complicated life. Scared I couldn't be the man you deserved because at that time, I could barely function." "So you decided for me," Julia said, her voice breaking. "You decided I couldn't handle it. You thought it was better to leave me than to give me a choice." "I know. It was cowardly. It was selfish." Jacob took her hands and Julia didn't pull away. "But Julia, you have to understand, I was broken, emotionally wrecked. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting?" Julia laughed without joy. "You left me pregnant and alone. How exactly was that protection?" "I didn't know." Jacob's voice rose a bit, but he quickly caught himself, remembering Mia was sleeping. "If I had known, Julia, I swear on everything, I never would have left. Never." Julia looked at him, searching for lies, for signs he wasn't being honest. But all she saw was genuine pain and deep regret. "You owe me 5 years, she whispered. 5 years of Mia growing up without a father. 5 years of her asking where her dad was. 5 years of me making up stories and lying to protect her little heart." "I know," Jacob squeezed her hands, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. If you'll let me. If you'll give me a chance." Julia was about to answer when they heard a sound from the bed. Mia was moving, waking up slowly. She opened her eyes, still a little groggy from the medicine and fever. "Mommy?" Her voice was soft. "I'm right here, honey." Julia immediately went to the bed, brushing her daughter's hair gently. Mia looked around, confused, then spotted Jacob. "The man from the fancy house is here." Jacob smiled and came closer. "I am. I came to check if you're feeling better." Mia looked at him with that serious focus only children seem to have, like she was studying something important. "You're nice," she finally decided. Jacob laughed, the emotion clear in his eyes. "You're really nice too. Are you going away again?" Mia asked, and the innocence in her voice hit Jacob like a punch. "No," he answered, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Mia seemed satisfied with the answer. Then, without thinking much, without fully understanding the weight of the word, she said something that stopped time. "Okay, Dad." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia froze, her eyes wide. Jacob stood completely still, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Tears began falling from his eyes before he even realized. What did you say, sweetheart?" Julia asked softly. Mia looked between them, confused by their reaction. "Dad, he's my dad, right? He looks like me. And Grandma Eleanor said he is." Julia looked at Jacob, who had covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders shaking. Eleanor told her? Julia whispered. Mia went on, still innocent. Grandma showed me pictures of him when he was little. He had the same eyes as me. She said he's my daddy. Jacob couldn't hold it in anymore. He knelt beside the bed, taking Mia's small hand with infinite care. Yes, he said through the tears. I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. Mia, with the simplicity of children who don't yet understand the complexity of adult emotions, just smiled. That's okay. You're here now. Those simple words, spoken so naturally, broke something inside Jacob. He gently hugged Mia, crying openly, and the little girl just hugged him back, confused but happy. Julia watched, tears falling from her own eyes. Seeing her daughter in her father's arms for the first time, seeing Jacob completely vulnerable and overwhelmed by everything he had missed, was both painful and healing. Dad? Mia repeated, trying the word. Are you going to stay forever now? Jacob looked at Julia over Mia's head, his eyes pleading for permission, for forgiveness, for a chance. Julia wanted to stay angry. She wanted to keep her guard up. But looking at Mia, so happy to finally have a dad, she felt those walls begin to crack. He's going to visit a lot, Julia finally said, her voice soft but firm. But slowly, okay? We need to get to know him better first. Mia nodded, yawning. Okay, Mommy? She fell back asleep quickly, worn out from the long day. Jacob stayed kneeling beside the bed for a long moment, still holding Mia's hand. When he finally stood up and looked at Julia, she saw something different in his eyes. Determination, purpose, and hope. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me this chance. Julia nodded, wiping her tears. This isn't for you, it's for her. I know. Jacob looked down at his sleeping daughter, and I'm going to prove I deserve it. Every single day. I will. In the days following Mia's release from the hospital, Julia's life changed completely. Mia recovered quickly, and along with her health came something unexpected, a constant request. Mommy, when is Daddy coming? It was the third time just that morning. Julia was trying to fold laundry in the tiny living room while Mia was drawing at the coffee table. He said he'd come after lunch, sweetheart. I already told you. But has lunch already passed? Mia asked for the 5th time. Not yet. What about now? Still no. Julia sighed but couldn't help smiling. Seeing Mia so excited was comforting, even if it meant hearing the same question every 5 minutes. When the doorbell finally rang, Mia jumped off the couch like she'd been hit by lightning. It's him! It's him! She ran to the door, and Julia followed. When she opened it, Jacob was standing there with a big smile and a large bag in his hands. Hey, champ, how's my girl? Daddy? Mia jumped into his arms, and he picked her up, laughing. Julia watched the scene, something warm stirring in her chest. I brought something for you, Jacob said, setting Mia down and opening the bag. Inside were some Play-Doh, a coloring book, and a giant stuffed unicorn that was nearly the same size as Mia. Wow, Mia hugged the unicorn. It's huge. Just like your smile, Jacob said, and Julia rolled her eyes with a smile. You're going to spoil her. I've got 5 years to make up for it, Jacob replied, and the sincerity in his voice made it hard for Julia to argue. The following weeks brought an unexpected routine. Jacob visited almost every day, always respecting the times and boundaries Julia set. He played with Mia, took her to the park, and tried, with mixed results, to fit into their lives. One day, he insisted on cooking dinner for the two of them at the Hartford mansion. You know how to cook? Julia asked, doubtful, as she watched Jacob tie on an apron in the mansion's enormous kitchen. Of course, I learned from online tutorials, he admitted, and Julia laughed. This is going to be a disaster. She was right. Jacob decided to make pasta. Simple, right? Wrong. He used too much water, not enough salt, and somehow managed to burn tomato sauce in a non-stick pan. How do you burn sauce? Julia asked, incredulous, watching the smoke rise. Pure talent, Jacob replied, frantically trying to open windows as the smoke alarm went off. Mia was laughing so hard, tears rolled down her cheeks. Daddy burned the food. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide at the chaotic scene. Jacob Hartford, what did you do to my kitchen? Experimental cooking? He offered, with an awkward smile. Mrs. Thompson had to step in and quickly put together a proper dinner while Jacob was banished from the kitchen. But despite the disaster, or maybe because of it, it turned out to be one of the most fun evenings Julia had had in years. Watching Jacob laugh at himself, Watching him genuinely try, even when he failed, showed a kind of humility she hadn't expected. Later that night, after Mia had fallen asleep on the living room couch with a full belly, Jacob and Julia sat on the porch, looking out at the moonlit garden. "You're trying," Julia said softly. "I'm doing my best," Jacob replied, "even if my best includes setting tomato sauce on fire." Julia laughed. "That was impressive, I'll admit." They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. "Julia," Jacob began, hesitant, "I know we still have a long road ahead, but are you starting to forgive me? Even just a little?" Julia thought carefully before answering. "I'm starting to see that you're trying to be different, but forgiveness, that takes time." "I've got time," Jacob said firmly. "All the time in the world." The next day, that fragile peace was shattered. Julia was at the mansion with Mia when they heard the sound of high heels angrily striking the marble floor. Vanessa stormed in like a tornado, her eyes blazing. "So it's true." She pointed at Julia. "You're living here now? Playing house?" "I don't live here," Julia replied calmly, picking Mia up. "And that's none of your business. It is my business. He's still my fiancé." "Technically ex-fiancé," Jacob said, appearing with a serious expression. "Vanessa, we already talked about this. Talking isn't the same as officially ending it." Vanessa nearly shouted. "You haven't made a public statement, you haven't returned the ring, so we're still engaged." Mia, confused and frightened by the yelling, buried her face in Julia's neck. "You're scaring my daughter," Jacob said, his voice low but sharp. "Your daughter?" Vanessa let out a hysterical laugh. "A bastard child who shows up out of nowhere and you just accept it? This will ruin your reputation. It'll ruin the Hartford family." Eleanor appeared, her expression ice cold. "Vanessa Reed, you will leave my house now or I'll have you escorted out." Not until Jacob admits publicly that he's making a mistake. Jacob stepped forward, shielding Julia and Mia. "You know what my mistake was, Vanessa? Getting engaged to someone who only cares about appearances and status. Mia is not a mistake. She's my daughter, and I will absolutely acknowledge her." Vanessa went pale. "You wouldn't dare." "I'll do more than that," Jacob said firmly. "I'm officially ending our engagement. I'll tell all of Savannah I have a beautiful daughter I'm getting to know, and I don't care if it hurts my reputation or the company. My daughter matters more than any business." The silence that followed was total. Vanessa looked around, realizing she had lost. "You'll regret this, Jacob Hartford," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "All of you will." She stormed off, and the sound of the door slamming echoed through the mansion. Mia lifted her head from Julia's shoulder. "She was mean." "She was a little mean," Julia agreed, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Jacob stepped closer, still slightly shaking from the adrenaline. "Were you serious?" Julia asked. "About the public announcement?" "Absolutely." Jacob looked at Mia with tenderness. "She's my daughter. I won't hide her like she's some shameful secret. I'll shout it from the rooftop of Hartford Investments if I have to." Eleanor came closer and placed her hand on her son's shoulder, pride in her eyes. "Your father would be proud. You're finally becoming the man you were meant to be." Jacob looked at Julia, hope shining in his eyes. "I'm trying. For her. For both of you." Julia felt the walls around her heart begin to crack a little more. The next morning, Jacob did exactly what he said he would. He called a press conference at Hartford Investments and stood in front of the cameras with the honesty of someone who had nothing left to hide. Julia was watching from the mansion, Mia playing on the floor beside her, while the live broadcast aired on TV. "Good morning," Jacob began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I called you here today because I need to be honest about something important in my life." Cameras clicked nonstop. Reporters leaned forward, eager. 5 years ago, I went through a very difficult time after losing my father. I ran away from my responsibilities, from my family, from myself. During that time, I met an extraordinary woman. We fell in love. And then, out of fear, I disappeared from her life. Whispers echoed around the room. "What I didn't know," Jacob continued, tears beginning to form, "is that she was expecting my child, a beautiful little girl named Mia, who's 4 years old and whom I only met recently." Chaos erupted. Flashbulbs went off. Reporters shouted questions all at once. Jacob raised his hand, asking for silence. "I know I made terrible mistakes. I was a coward. I was selfish. I abandoned someone who trusted me. And because of that, I missed out on 4 years of my daughter's life." His voice broke. But now that I know she exists, I'm going to do everything in my power to be the father she deserves. I don't care about scandal, about reputation, about what people will say about me. My daughter is more important than anything else. At the mansion, Julia felt tears run down her cheeks. Kayla, who was visiting, squeezed her hand. He really did it, Kayla whispered, amazed. He did, Julia agreed, her voice tight with emotion. Social media exploded. Hashtags about Jacob Hartford started trending, but to everyone's surprise, the public reaction was positive. Finally, a rich man taking responsibility, one tweet read. His honesty is refreshing. Admitting mistakes in public takes courage, another said. Of course, not everything was positive. Vanessa took to social media with her own dramatic statement, painting herself as the victim. But her attempt to gain sympathy fell flat when old videos of her being rude to staff and waiters started surfacing. Karma, Julia muttered as she watched the news. In the days that followed, reporters tried to find Julia and Mia. Photographers showed up near their apartment, even at the park where Mia played. It was frightening. Jacob immediately hired discreet security to protect them. Eleanor insisted they temporarily move into the mansion, where proper security was available. I don't want to be a burden, Julia protested. You're not a burden, Eleanor said firmly. You're family, and family protects family. Julia finally agreed, and for the first time, she and Mia officially moved into the Hartford mansion. Mia was thrilled. A huge room just for her, a giant garden to play in, and her father nearby every time she called. Mommy, this is like a castle. Mia twirled around her new room, her eyes shining. It's pretty big, huh? Julia admitted, still adjusting. When a particularly pushy reporter tried to confront Julia at the grocery store, showing up suddenly with cameras, Jacob stepped in like a human shield. She said she doesn't want to give interviews. Respect that. His voice was firm, protective. Mr. Hartford, the public wants to know. The public has no right to my family's privacy. Jacob cut him off. Now leave before I call security. Julia watched it all in surprise. Seeing Jacob defend her so fiercely, protect Mia with such determination, showed a side of him she had never seen before. Later that night, after Mia had gone to sleep, Julia found Jacob in the library. Thank you, she said softly, for today at the store. Jacob looked up from the book he was pretending to read. You don't have to thank me. It's my job to protect you. Even so. Julia sat down in the armchair across from him. You're really trying, Jacob. I can see that. His eyes lit up with hope. Does that mean you're starting to trust me? Julia thought carefully. I'm starting to believe that you've changed, that you want to change. It's a start. Jacob smiled, and it was a genuine smile, full of gratitude. That's more than I deserve. Eleanor entered the library just then, looking a little flustered. Jacob, I need your help in the office. I'm looking for an important document, and I can't find it. What document? Jacob stood up. The company papers your father mentioned before he passed. He said he left something important locked away. I've never been able to find it. The three of them went to the office that had belonged to the Hartford patriarch. It was a room Eleanor rarely entered, kept mostly untouched since his death. They began searching methodically. Drawers, files, bookshelves. Jacob examined the large mahogany desk, opening every compartment. There's something odd here, he murmured, tapping the side of a drawer. It sounds hollow. He pressed on different parts of the wood until there was a soft click. A hidden panel opened on the side of the drawer, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax. On the envelope, written in elegant handwriting, for my son Jacob. Open when you're ready to come home. The three of them froze, staring at the envelope. Julia noticed Jacob's hands trembling as he picked up the letter. Eleanor covered her mouth, tears already forming. He left that for you, Eleanor whispered. All these years, it's been here waiting. Jacob held the envelope with great care, like it was made of glass. His hands were shaking so much, Julia had to resist the urge to reach out and steady them. Do you want us to step out? Julia offered gently. Jacob looked at her, then at his mother, his eyes full of unshed tears. No, stay, please. I need you here. Eleanor stepped closer, placing her hand on her son's shoulder. Julia stood on the other side, offering quiet support. With trembling fingers, Jacob carefully broke the wax seal, as if damaging it would be a betrayal. He opened the envelope and pulled out several handwritten pages. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to the father he had loved and lost. Jacob took a deep breath, preparing to read the words. He unfolded the pages reverently. His voice shook as he began to read out loud. "My dear Jacob, if you're reading this, it means you've finally come home, and it also means I'm gone before I could tell you what I need you to know." Jacob's voice cracked, and he had to pause. Eleanor gently squeezed his shoulder. Julia remained quiet, giving him space. He took another breath and went on. "I know I've put too much pressure on you. I see it in your eyes every day. The weight of expectations, of the Hartford name, of the future I mapped out for you, and I deeply regret that." A choked sound escaped Jacob's throat as the tears finally came. "You're not just my heir, Jacob. You're my son, and as your father, my main duty should have been your happiness, not preserving a business legacy." Eleanor covered her mouth as her own silent tears began to fall. "If you feel the need to run, then run. Go find out who you are without the weight of our name. Live like a regular person for a while. Discover what brings you joy. You have my blessing, even if I can't say it in person." Jacob had to stop again, openly sobbing now. Moved by instinct, Julia stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. He held onto it like a lifeline. "Hartford Investments will survive without you for a few months or even years, but you won't survive if you don't learn how to breathe. So breathe, my son. Live, love, make mistakes, and when you're ready, come home." Jacob's voice was so broken it was barely audible as he read the final lines. "I know you'll come back a better man, stronger, more complete, and I'll be proud of you, no matter what path you choose. With all my love, your father." The silence that followed was deep and sacred. Jacob held the pages against his chest, crying like a child. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, crying too. Julia felt her own face wet with tears. The letter changed everything. It didn't justify the abandonment or erase the pain, but it explained. It gave context. It showed that Jacob hadn't just run away selfishly. He had followed advice, a blessing, from a father who saw his son was drowning. "He knew," Jacob sobbed into his mother's shoulder. "He knew I was falling apart, and he gave me permission to go." "And he was right," Eleanor said through her tears. "You needed to go. You needed to find yourself." Jacob finally pulled away, wiping his face with his hands. He looked at Julia with red, swollen eyes. "Do you understand now?" His voice was hoarse. "Why I did what I did?" Julia nodded slowly. "I understand it better. It doesn't excuse leaving me without a word. It doesn't excuse Mia growing up without her father." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I understand that you weren't just being cruel. You were lost." "Completely lost," Jacob agreed. "And when I met you, Julia, for the first time in months, I felt found. But then I got scared. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd only see me as the broken heir, not as Eric, the guy who made you laugh at the cafe." Julia stepped closer to him, her voice gentler now. "You were a fool not to let me choose, but I can see now that you were hurting. We both were." Jacob took her hands in his, hope shining through his tears. "Can we try again? Not as Eric and Julia, but as Jacob and Julia? Start fresh, but this time with complete honesty?" Julia felt her heart speed up. Part of her wanted to say yes right away, but the mother part, the one who had protected Mia alone for years, hesitated. "Maybe," she finally said, "but slowly. And you need to prove consistency, Jacob. Not just sweet words and big gestures. Real consistency, day after day." "I will," he promised sincerely. "Every day, for you and for Mia." Eleanor, still wiping away tears, smiled through the emotion. "I think we need some tea or something stronger." Julia laughed, the tension easing. "Definitely something stronger." In the weeks that followed, something shifted between Julia and Jacob. Their conversations became easier, more natural. They laughed together, especially at Jacob's hopeless attempts to do simple things. Like the time he tried to put together a dollhouse for Mia and ended up with 3 leftover pieces and the whole thing leaning sideways. "How do you even end up with extra pieces?" Julia asked, laughing as she looked at the wobbly structure. "Special talent," Jacob replied with a crooked smile. "Clearly those pieces are decorative." "Decorative?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "They're structural screws. Technical details." Mia just laughed, thinking the crooked house was perfect as it was. Or when Jacob tried to do Mia's hair and ended up with something that looked like a bird's nest. "Daddy, my hair looks funny," Mia said, staring into the mirror. "It's artistic," Jacob offered, not sounding too sure. Julia had to completely redo it, but she was laughing so hard she could barely hold the comb. Those small mistakes, those honest efforts, showed something important. Jacob was present. He was trying. And Julia could feel her guard slowly starting to come down. One evening, after Mia had gone to sleep, Jacob and Julia sat outside in the garden under the stars. The conversation drifted from light topics to deeper ones. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Jacob asked, his voice quiet in the dark. "The two of us, as a real family?" Julia looked up at the stars, thinking, "I think it depends on you, on proving you won't run the moment things get hard." "I won't," Jacob said firmly. "Never again." "Promises are easy to make under pretty stars," Julia replied, but there was a smile in her voice. "Keeping them in the morning when Mia wakes up at 6 yelling because her stuffed unicorn fell off the bed, that's the hard part." Jacob laughed. "I'm ready for 6 a.m. unicorn emergencies. I'm ready for all of it." Julia finally looked at him, and their eyes met in the soft light of the garden. Something passed between them, a spark, a possibility, a future that maybe could be real. Jacob leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Julia didn't. Their lips met in a soft kiss, hesitant, full of years of hurt and newly found hope. When they pulled apart, Julia was blushing. "That was a beginning?" Jacob offered, hopeful. "Maybe," Julia admitted, but she was smiling. In the days that followed, they began cautiously talking about the future. What it would mean to raise Mia together, where they might live, how they'd balance responsibilities. That's when the call came. Jacob was in the office when his phone rang. A headhunter from New York, representing one of the biggest investment firms in the country. They wanted Jacob as their CEO. An incredible salary, international prestige, a chance to start over in a new city far from the scandals of Savannah. "It's an amazing offer, Mr. Hartford," the cheerful voice said on the other end. "We'll need an answer within a week." Jacob hung up, stunned. New York. A complete change. A chance to run again. The realization hit him like a punch. It would be easy to accept, to convince himself it was about money, about his career, but it would be a lie. It would mean running away from the hard work of building something real here in Savannah. He had to tell Julia. But when he saw her later that day, the way she smiled at him, the trust just starting to appear in her eyes, he hesitated. "Everything okay?" Julia asked, noticing the look on his face. "Yeah, just work," he lied and instantly hated himself for it. But before he could say more, Julia's phone rang. It was Eleanor, asking her to come to the office to go over some papers. Julia left, and Jacob was alone with his secret. The New York offer burned in his mind, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the old urge to run creeping back in. The next morning, Jacob woke up to Mia jumping on his bed. "Daddy, Daddy, wake up!" He opened his eyes, seeing her excited little face inches from his own. "Good morning, sweetheart. What time is it?" 6:30. Grandma said there are pancakes." Jacob groaned but smiled. This was what mattered. Not tempting offers in New York, not convenient escapes. This little girl jumping on his bed at 6:30 in the morning. He picked up his phone and typed a quick email. "Thank you very much for the offer, but I must decline. My place is here with my family. Sincerely, Jacob Hartford." He hit send before he could change his mind. Over breakfast, Eleanor noticed something different about him. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am," Jacob replied, watching Mia drown her pancakes in too much syrup. "I made an important decision. Want to share?" "Later," he smiled. "First I need to talk to Julia." He found her in the garden, reading while Mia played nearby. "Julia, can we talk?" She looked up, closing her book. "Of course. Everything all right?" Jacob sat beside her on the bench. "I got a job offer, in New York, CEO of a major company." He saw her face pale, panic rising in her eyes. "You're going to," she began, her voice trembling. "No," Jacob cut in firmly. "I already turned it down." Julia blinked, confused. "What?" "I said no. I didn't even really consider it." He took her hands. "My place is here, with you, with Mia, with my family." Julia felt tears of relief sting her eyes. "Are you sure? It's a big opportunity." "I'm absolutely sure." Jacob squeezed her hands. "No career is worth more than my daughter, than you." Julia couldn't help it. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." In the weeks that followed, Jacob did more than stay. He transformed. He decided that if he was going to be a real father and partner, he had to learn how to live a normal life. Not the life of a millionaire heir with staff doing everything, but real life. The results were interesting, like the time he tried to make his own bed and ended up tangled in the sheets. "How did you get stuck?" Julia asked, finding him wrapped up like a burrito. "The bed attacked me," Jacob replied, his voice muffled by the fabric. Or the time he did his own laundry and threw a red shirt in with the whites. Everything came out pink. "Now you have a themed wardrobe," Julia said, holding up a pink pair of boxers. "Pink is masculine," Jacob insisted, but his face matched the color. Trying to change a light bulb ended with Jacob getting a small shock and yelling so dramatically that Mia thought a monster had attacked him. "Daddy's scared," Mia told Julia. "A little bit," Julia agreed, laughing. But every failure, every clumsy attempt, showed something important. Jacob was trying. He wasn't just talking about change, he was living it. He started picking Mia up from school. The first time he got lost 3 times, arrived late, sweaty and flustered, but he kept trying, and within 2 weeks he already knew all the teachers and the moms of the other kids. He learned how to cook basic meals, burned a lot at first, but eventually managed to make pasta without setting the kitchen on fire. "It's edible," Julia said after tasting his spaghetti. "Is edible a compliment?" Jacob asked. "From where you started? It's a miracle." Julia watched all of it, her walls finally crumbling for good. This wasn't the man who had run away 5 years ago. This was someone committed, present, desperately trying to be better. One night, Jacob showed up at her bedroom door. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He sat on the edge of the bed, nervous. "I wanted to ask you something. Dinner, just the 2 of us. Tomorrow night. Eleanor will stay with Mia." Julia felt butterflies in her stomach. "Like a date?" "Like a date," Jacob confirmed. "If you'll say yes." Julia smiled. "I'll say yes." The next evening, Julia came down the mansion stairs in a simple but beautiful dress Eleanor had insisted on buying for her. Jacob was waiting in the hall, wearing a suit, and his eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Julia replied, blushing. Eleanor appeared with Mia, who was in unicorn pajamas. "Mommy looks like a princess," Mia declared. "She really does," Jacob agreed, offering his arm to Julia. Dinner was set up in the garden. Fairy lights hung from the trees, a small candlelit table, soft music playing in the background. It was simple, but perfect. "You did all this?" Julia asked, impressed. "I had help from Mrs. Thompson," Jacob admitted, "but the idea was mine." They sat down, and dinner flowed naturally. They talked about everything. Mia, the future, dreams, fears. They laughed at funny memories and had serious talks about what they hoped to build together. "You know," Julia said at one point, "I never thought I'd get here, that I'd be able to trust you again." "And now?" Jacob asked, holding her hand across the table. "Now I trust you, completely." Jacob felt a lump in his throat. It was everything he had hoped to hear. "Julia, there's something I need to ask you. Something important." He stood up, walked over to a side table, and picked up something small. When he returned, he was holding a small velvet box. Julia's heart skipped a beat. "Jacob?" He knelt beside her chair, the box still closed between them. "Before I open this, there's something I have to say." His voice was full of emotion. "I messed everything up 5 years ago. I was a coward, selfish, and I missed the most important years of our daughter's life. I missed years with you." Tears began to roll down Julia's face. "But you gave me a second chance. One I didn't deserve, and I've spent every day since then trying to prove I'm worthy of her. Worthy of you. Worthy of Mia." He took a shaky breath, visibly trembling. "So now, I need to ask you something. Something that could change everything." With trembling hands, he opened the box, revealing its contents. Jacob held the box open, but it wasn't what Julia expected. Inside wasn't a ring, but a small folded piece of paper. "Before anything else," Jacob began, voice quivering, "I have to ask for something even more important." Julia looked confused, tears still streaming down her face. Jacob unfolded the paper. Written by hand, it was a list. "Forgiveness," he read. "For disappearing without explanation, for leaving you pregnant and alone, for missing Mia's birth, her first steps, her first words. For every night you stayed up alone, worried and afraid. For every bill you struggled to pay. For every tear you shed because of me." Julia covered her mouth with her hands. sobbing, for making you doubt you were worthy of love, for stealing 5 years we'll never get back, for not being there when you needed me most. His voice cracked, for being a coward when I should have been brave. He set the paper aside and took her hands. Julia Fowler, before I ask you anything else, I ask for your forgiveness. From my heart, my soul, and everything I am. I know I don't deserve it. I know words can't erase pain. But you need to know, I carry that regret every day. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Julia pulled her hands free and hit him with a napkin. Hard. You're an idiot. She hit him again. A complete idiot. And once more. How could you leave me like that? Then she pulled him into a tight hug, crying into his shoulder. But you've changed. You really have. I can see it. Jacob hugged her back, crying too. I have. For you, for Mia, for myself. They stayed like that for a long while, 5 years of pain and loss finally being released. When they pulled apart, Jacob gently wiped her face. Now, he said, his voice still rough, I can ask the other question. He reached into his pocket and took out another box. This one had a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. Julia, you've made me a better man. You gave me the most amazing daughter in the world. You gave me a second chance I never thought I'd have. It would be the greatest honor of my life if you'd marry me. Julia looked at the ring, then at him, and let out a laugh through her tears. Are you sure? I'm stubborn, bossy, and if you leave me again, I'll bury you in the backyard of this mansion. Jacob laughed out loud. I'm counting on it. Then yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Hartford. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, deeply, full of promises. Suddenly, they heard a shout from the mansion. She said yes. Eleanor was at the window with Mia, both of them clearly having spied on the whole thing. Eleanor was crying with joy, and Mia was jumping up and down. Mommy's marrying Daddy, Mia shouted. Jacob and Julia laughed, waving up at them. I guess our privacy's over, Julia said. Worth every second, Jacob replied. The months that followed were a whirlwind of planning. Julia insisted on something simple, nothing over the top. Eleanor wanted something grand, but respected Julia's wishes. The wedding took place in the Hartford Mansion's garden on a spring afternoon. White chairs arranged in a semicircle, simple but beautiful flowers, and a small group of guests, just close family and true friends. Julia wore a simple white dress that made her look stunning. Mia was the flower girl, dressed in pink and holding a little basket of petals she tossed with far too much enthusiasm. Slow down, honey, Julia whispered just before the walk. But it's fun, Mia protested, already having emptied half the basket. Kayla, standing beside them as maid of honor, laughed. Let her be. It's perfect. When the music started, Mia practically ran down the aisle, tossing petals everywhere, some even hit the guests. Everyone laughed. Then it was Julia's turn. She walked down the aisle alone. She didn't need anyone to give her away. She was giving herself, by choice. Jacob stood waiting at the makeshift altar, and the moment their eyes met, he started crying right away. Already crying? Julia teased as she reached his side. I can't help it. You look perfect, he replied. The ceremony was simple and full of emotion. When it was time for the rings, Mia brought the little pillow but tripped over her own feet. The rings flew into the air and everyone gasped. Jacob caught them mid-air like a baseball player, earning applause and laughter. You saved the rings, Mia cheered, proud. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, Mia raised her hand. Everyone froze. Julia and Jacob looked nervous. Go ahead, sweetheart, the officiant encouraged. I love you both, and I want cake. The crowd burst into laughter. Eleanor was crying so much she needed 3 tissues. Any real objections? The officiant asked, still chuckling. Silence. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Jacob pulled Julia in for a kiss, and Mia ran to hug both of their legs. We're a real family now, she shouted. The reception was small and filled with laughter. Jacob tried to give a heartfelt speech, but Mia kept interrupting with, Dad, can we eat cake now? When they finally cut the cake, Mia managed to smear frosting on both of their faces. Easily the best photo of the day. Later, as they danced their first dance, Julia whispered, You know you're stuck with my terrible jokes for the rest of your life, right? Can't imagine anything better, Jacob replied. And waking up early with Mia jumping on the bed. Can't wait. And my friends constantly evaluating you. Kayla already approved me. I survived the worst. Julia laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Jacob Hartford. Even if you're a bit of an idiot sometimes. I love you, Julia Hartford. Thank you for giving me a second chance. They danced under the garden lights, with Mia eventually joining them, forming a little family circle. Eleanor watched from a distance, her heart full. Her son had found redemption. Her daughter-in-law had found the love she deserved. And her granddaughter now had the complete family every child should have. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Mrs. Thompson approached Eleanor with a conspiratorial smile. I've prepared the room next to Mia's, she whispered. For what? Eleanor asked. For the next baby, of course. I give it 6 months before we have another Hartford running around. Eleanor laughed out loud. Mrs. Thompson, you're terrible. I'm just realistic, the housekeeper replied with a wink. I've seen how those two look at each other. We'll have more noise in this mansion soon enough. Julia, who was close enough to hear, rolled her eyes but smiled. Let's enjoy being 3 for now, thank you. But you're not ruling out 4? Mrs. Thompson teased. Jacob appeared, wrapping his arms around Julia from behind. 1 step at a time, but we're not ruling anything out. Julia turned to him. You want more kids? I want everything with you, he answered simply. Mia, half asleep in Eleanor's arms, mumbled, I want a baby brother, or sister, either one. Everyone laughed. Julia looked around, at the mansion that was now her home, the family she had gained, the husband by her side, and the daughter who had always been her strength. 5 years ago, she was alone, scared, pregnant, and abandoned. Today, she was surrounded by love, safety, and a future full of possibilities. You know, she said to Jacob, I think in the end, it was all worth it. Every painful moment, every tear, every struggle brought us here, Jacob agreed. And here is exactly where we're meant to be. They kissed softly as the stars began to appear in the savannah sky, the garden lights twinkling gently, and Mia finally fell sound asleep in her grandmother's arms. A family. Complete. Imperfect. Real. And absolutely perfect, just the way it was. What did you think of Julia and Jacob's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And feel free to check out more touching stories right here on the final screen.